Okay, continuing with our committee assignments this afternoon. This is the Community and Economic Development Committee. My name is Gene Knutson. I'm chair, and with me on the committee is Michael Lillquist and Pinky Vargas. We have two items. The first item is resolution amending the 2012 Housing Levy Administrative Financing Plan and the resolution authorizing the 2014 HUD Action Plan. Mr. Stahlheim.
All right, thank you. David Stahlheim, Community Development Block Grant Program Manager. I'm going to do one presentation that's covering both of the items here, so I'm going to walk through this. It's the 2014 Action Plan. For those of you who have been on through this before, we used to have the Action Plan in the month of October, but we changed our program year to go from July through June now. And so this is our new normal, to do an action plan at the beginning of May of every year, where we have to turn this into HUD on May 15th. So the process that we had is the schedule started roughly in January, where the City Council finalized the budget. We went through priority setting. In the middle of February, we released the request for proposals, had workshops, had proposals come in the beginning of March. We held a public hearing in front of our Community Development Advisory Board in the first part of April, and finished their recommendations to the mayor, and the mayor is bringing forth her recommendations to the council for action here this month. So there's a couple things that we did in the 2013-17 Consolidated Plan that needs to drive action. I just want to continue to highlight some of these things because they're really important issues with respect to things that we do in community development, with housing, with services, and transportation, anything throughout the community. And one of the really telling things is how our population is changing. As we are getting older, the baby boomers, that population that you see in the red right here is going up, and that will continue to go up. And so over the next 20 years, what we do with our aging population is going to be a huge issue for our community. It really affects housing, affects services, transportation, as I said. And you see these are the real numbers, and so the biggest increase in the real numbers were over 60 in the last, between 2000 and 2010. Of course, we have a very strange pyramid in the city of Bellingham, in that we have the college-age population. So our pyramid starts at the age of 20, but quite often this is a little bit more of a pyramid shape. But as a nation, we're also growing a little bit more even, where the populations, the numbers are about equal, and that's real different. So this shows the real numbers in the population, the elderly between 2000 and 2010. So again, just showing those real numbers. And as you think, in 10 years from now, when we have another slide of the 2020 census, or we keep track of this, these are issues that we're going to see. And again, as we look at services and housing needs in our community, it's a pretty significant issue. Bellingham housing tenure is really different as well. We have way more renter-occupied housing units than owner-occupied. And you look at that comparison to the rest of Whatcom County outside the city of Bellingham, where over 70% of the units outside of Bellingham are owner-occupied, and less than half of them in Bellingham are owner-occupied. Our poverty rate is high in this community. It's higher than the state. It's higher than Whatcom County. It's higher than other cities within our community. Over 20% of people in Bellingham are facing poverty. One of the things that's really changing in the last several years is our vacancy rates are decreasing and our rents are increasing. It's becoming a very significant issue across all economic sectors, I think, in our community. As you see, the average rent over the last 4 years basically has continued to increase, whereas the vacancy rates are decreasing. A little over 1% vacancy rates overall in Bellingham. This is particularly acute in the one-bedroom units when we talk about really affordable housing and homeless housing issues. The one-bedroom unit rates that were reported in 2013 were about 0.5%. And so we have very low vacancy rates there, whereas the income or the rents are going up as well. As the incomes are flat and rents are going up, one of the things that we really pay attention to is the burden that it places on households, and particularly those that don't have a lot of income. Those earning less than 30% of the median family income are paying more than 50% of their income paid for housing. And so 4,200 renters in the last tabulation of the community housing affordability study, we're paying more than 50% of their rent and 50% of their income towards rent. And it's not only just all households, but it's also the elderly. And you see here those that are earning less than 30% of median family income. We have a large portion of our elderly population that are also income burdened. In fact, I just had a little impromptu meeting. Someone came in. Her Social Security income was $895, and she has a subsidized unit of paying $500 a month. So it leaves her a little over $300 a month in expenses for everything else in her life. So as you look at some of those needs, those are what drove the priorities in our consolidated plan. The priorities were homelessness, increasing affordable housing supply, assisting the elderly, special needs population, healthy children and families, preservation of housing, looking at specific neighborhoods, geographic priorities, and then coordination and delivery of services. So our 2014 action plan, we sent out proposals or requests for proposals for 8 different competitive opportunities. We had a public facility improvement category, which includes nonprofits. We had a housing preservation. We had a housing multifamily production. We had a community housing development organization set aside that's required. We had a tenant-based rental assistance program, winter emergency shelter, housing services, and human and social services. So we've had a lot of things go out. One of the great things about federal funding and levy funding is that they come with a few strings attached, and I guess that's part of my job, is trying to figure out all those strings that are attached. Some of the things that are really important for us to remember is the Community Development Block Grant Program is the only place where we can spend non-housing dollars. So when we talk about the federal home program, it has to go towards housing. And when we talk about the levy, it's the home fund, it has to go towards housing. But our Community Development Block Grant Program is the one place where we can spend non-housing dollars. And so as we get proposals that come in, one of the things that I do is try to look at the proposals, but then try to match those proposals to the funding source so that we can get what we want as a community and still meet the requirements of the different funding programs. In the block grant program, there's also limitations on how much money we can spend. As much as we might want to spend all of our federal allocation of dollars towards services, we can't. The rules say it's capped at 15% of our grant and program income, so we can't allocate any more dollars. And historically, the city has always allocated up to that 15%. In the federal home program, we have to allocate. There's a minimum of 15% that goes to what's called community housing development organizations. And then the levy program, 2/3 of the funding has to benefit those that earn 50% of area median income or below. With respect to the city general fund, the direction can be set by the mayor and council, but we cannot give public funds under the Constitution. However, we can assist the poor and infirm under the Constitution. Okay, so here's kind of the programs that we have, and just run through these. The Homebuyer Program, we didn't actually have a competitive application round this year because we have adequate commitments that'll carry us through 2015. At the end of 2015, we'll have almost $140,000 still in the bank account that will allow us to go out for more Homebuyer Program. Public Facility Improvement Program. This is, although it's called public facility, it's broadly interpreted to include those facilities owned by nonprofit and operated so as to be open to the general public. It has to benefit low-income persons. Last year, we made 3 commitments to projects: the food bank, domestic violence, sexual assault services, and interfaith health clinic. And this year, we had 3 new applications and recommendations. The food bank asked for additional funding. They have not yet started. They asked for $100,000. The Opportunity Council, their main building, to repair that building, to almost $225,000. And Bridget Collins, repair of $24,000. So all these recommendations are coming forth at $348,868. In the Housing Preservation Program, we're carrying forward some prior commitments from last year. Deer Run Terrace is a housing authority project. YWCA, Dorothy Place, Lydia Place, Habitat for Humanity, Emergency Repair Program, and Manufactured and Mobile Home Repair. And under new and continued commitments, We would continue the city's owner-occupied rehabilitation program of almost $447,000. A new commitment of additional 5 years to the Opportunity Council for their manufactured mobile home repair program of $625,000. And so that would be $125,000 a year for the next 5 years. Under Housing Production Program, we did not receive any new applications. I didn't put it on this slide, but we do have 3 existing projects that we committed to last year. We have a 50-unit farm worker housing project out on Bakerview that properties have been acquired now, and we're going to be starting construction the next year. 42-unit project downtown, the Cornwall Housing Project, and then another project of 6 units for Sun Community. All those projects are on the boards and getting ready to get built and get occupied. So under this program, all federal funds need to be allocated, but the levy funds can be held in reserve. There's no use it or lose it there. We basically can hold those in reserve. We are recommending that because of the federal funds, is that we would allocate $115,033 to an infill demonstration project that would use the infill toolkit. We'd have to go out and seek proposals. This was on our plan last year. We'd like to continue that. We would hold the 2015 levy funds in reserve of nearly $2,354,329. And then in 2016, we would have additional funding available, and so we would basically be able to go out for projects next year for a call for $4.2 million, basically, for new housing production. One of the favorite acronyms is we call it CHODO, Community Housing Development Organization. Again, 15% has to be set aside. If we don't set it aside for these organizations, we can't allocate it for any other reason. The funds go back to HUD to be distributed. 2 organizations are qualified for this, Culson Community Land Trust and the Opportunity Council. The recommendation is to allocate $245,000 to Culson Community Land Trust for development of 7 homeowner units, project that they're working on. Because this project has not been fully developed yet, one of the recommendations of the Community Development Advisory Board is for that to come back for review and approval before we sign contracts for that. Tenant-Based Rental Assistance Program. This program assists tenants with rent. The priority is on homeless families. We've been doing this project with the Opportunity Council for more than 15 years. Recommendation is a 3-year commitment to the Opportunity Council with annual amendments when federal funds are granted. We are recommending to increase our funding commitment to this program to $165,000 per year plus administrative expenses. Previous year we were at $125,000. Winter emergency shelter. The goal is to provide shelter during the coldest months of December through March of 2015. Priority again is on serving families with children, and the recommendation is $30,000 to the Opportunity Council. Human and Social Services. In 2014, the Mayor and Council increased human service funding by $237,000, including $30,000 for the Meals on Wheels program. Despite that increased funding, a large unfunded gap still remains with all the proposals we got in. We assumed that we had a little over almost $315,000. We had over $572,000 of requests for this program, leaving a deficit of $257,842. CDAB recommended, based on that budget assumption, of having 13 activities for grants, 3 activities for transition funding. When we brought this to the mayor recognized that there was a lot of unfunded needs that were good projects on the list, and the mayor has recommended to add another $59,000 basically in this program for human and social services by taking out of the housing levy, basically funding housing projects out of the housing levy, frees up $59,000 where we can get to $373,785 in the budget. We still would have almost $200,000 unmet needs. So even going that additional funding still does not get to all the activities clearly. This program would have 19 activities for grants under this program. In the housing services, we had 7 applications for funding: Northwest Youth Services, Lydia Place, Opportunity Council, 2 different programs. Northwest Youth Services, their transitional living program. The YWCA, I don't know if everyone's aware, probably are, but has taken over ownership and management of Women Care Shelter. So the YWCA now operates that, as well as their existing the Larrabee residents. And so we have $270,000 and $270,012 in that program. So as I mentioned earlier, the first action on your agenda, the first resolution, is actually an amendment to the housing levy to move some of the funding out of the production program into the services program. And so we would be reducing the production and preservation of homes program by $75,000 per year. We anticipate this need not only this year, but we anticipate the next through the life of the levy. And so that's why we're asking for each year of that to happen. So total reduction of $450,000, and then the flip side is we increase that in the rental assistance and supportive services. So there's no additional funding that is lost or going to the general fund as a result of this. Finally, the last thing is general fund assumptions that we used in this program. One of the difficult things that we've had is that all of our service funding applications are assuming from July through June of 2015, and of course the council and the mayor have not yet done the 2015 budget. So we had to make some assumptions as to what kind of revenue would be available next year. And so as you can see, my assumptions that I used for revenue I had to go to just half a year, but my assumption really was going back to the 2012 level and not the higher level that you did in 2014 here. And so in terms of my basically a little over $85,000 I used for the first half of 2015, and with the assumption that you're going to appropriate at least $85,000 in 2015. So with that, if there's any questions,
Okay.
glad to.
Committee members, the first thing we need to do is adopt a resolution amending the 2012 Housing Levy Administration and Financing Plan. Or questions? Go ahead, Mike.
You, Mr. Stallheim, presented a persuasive case for all the needs that were requested and weren't funded, and the administration is suggesting a shift between categories in the Bellingham's home fund. I guess I'm having a problem with that, though, because my recollection is that when we went to the voters, we promised something like 3/4 of the money would go to housing production, and one of the to me, selling features of the home fund is that it wasn't going to be just we weren't just going to be giving people fish, we were going to be building fishing ponds. Sorry, but I mean, we'd actually be increasing the housing stock, and 3/4 of this was for housing production. Well, I think we made one little shift a while ago for less than 3/4, and now the administration is asking for another shift down to, instead of 75%, now down to 71%. So I'm concerned that we're backing away from what we sold, which is that the home fund were really mostly about housing production. So unfortunately, you have two important needs, both housing related, competing with each other. I guess I would say to the committee, I'm concerned about us backing away from the initial commitment, which I think was around 3/4. Maybe someone else remembers how explicit that promise was better than I do. Mr. Stallheim?
Go ahead.
I just had a question in regards to the reallocation of funds, is whether that is a temporary adjustment right now because we can use those dollars immediately to help people because we don't have the projects to put it into housing. So is it a temporary transition, or is this permanently the way the allocations would go?
Well, what we're seeing is, clearly the amount of requests that we had for services is way more than dollars that we have available, and they're all excellent projects. And so we've asked that the plan be amended through the whole life of the levy to add $75,000 in services. We don't anticipate that demand's going to go down whatsoever. A little bit to answer Michael's question is that, we didn't have any applications this year for production funding, and we'll have $4.2 million available next year. We're on target for meeting all of our goals. Our goals were 101 units over the first 2 years. We were right on target for that. I don't anticipate that we'll be off our target for meeting that over the life of the levy.
What amount is brought in every year?
$3 million.
So we're already over $1 million on that already then for this year? Nobody applied this year for projects?
And also just one of the things that we do with the levy is that we're also programming funds in the future. And so when we go for a call for projects, we are actually calling for 2015 dollars because it takes a long time for a development project to get off the ground. And so we manage the cash flow of that. So right now we have projects that are consistent with our existing revenue source, but we are making commitments in the future, understanding that that revenue will be coming in later.
Brian, do you want to say anything on behalf of the mayor's office?
Sure. Brian Heinrich, Mayor's Office. I think just to Michael's point that what the administration is trying to do is direct resources to the areas of greatest need. That's been, I think David touched upon that in terms of just looking at the actual requests. There's an opportunity to focus that funding in this direction by amending this plan, recognizing that there will be what appears to be at least pretty significant dollars available for production should that happen in the next year.
Gary?
Yeah, I'm not on the committee, and I understand what Michael's concerns are, but I also am really struck by the statistics that are presented. We have a community that has much higher than state level poverty, and we've got some of the highest rents also in the state, and the rents are climbing. When you look at the average person, younger people that are working at minimum wage getting, if they're lucky, 32 hours a week, because most people don't want to pay 40 hours a week. When we say 50% of the rent, to get into a place there, you're looking closer to 3/4. I mean, it's really ridiculous out there in terms of younger people, and those that are on the fixed income on Social Security are in that same situation. And yes, I'd like to see us be able to build, but at the same time, getting people into some kind of shelter over their head is just got to be a priority. So, I understand it, but if the committee brings it forward, I'm going to vote for it tonight for the change, because we got to get people into something.
Michael, then Pinky.
Well, two things. Everyone agrees that we need to help with housing affordability for elderly population, fixed incomes, for working people who have, less than a wage, which provides good housing. But that's exactly why that it's so important that we create a permanent solution by building affordable housing stock rather than keep subsidizing existing stock, which may never solve the problem. If there's no more houses where the same people are competing for the same houses. So we have very low vacancy rates right now. The problem, there's a supply side problem, the lower end of the housing market. That's exactly what the Home Fund was meant to address by allocating 3/4 of the money towards housing production. So I am still concerned about that, because I think that that's a long-term permanent solution to exactly the concerns that Terry was bringing up. But I do want to follow up with what you said, Mr. Stahlheim, that there were no new applications received. And what you're saying is we can roll those dollars forward, and in the following year we'll have a very substantial amount of money available for qualified applicants. But I guess I'm wondering why there were no qualified applicants this year, and will there be qualified applicants in the following year? Is there something that needs to be done to adjust the program to make it more attractive and useful to applicants? So, I mean, you said we're meeting our housing targets. I'd like to exceed them if possible. I'd like to know whether there's adjustments in the housing production program that would make those dollars more attractive, and what we'd have before us is more applications for more production.
Yeah, I think that there's probably multiple reasons that that there weren't applications. First, all of our housing developers are extremely busy with existing portfolio of projects. Bellingham Housing Authority just recapitalized 7 projects throughout Whatcom County, and so they're totally occupied with that. Catholic Housing Services is about to undertake most of that new production. 92 of those units are going to be with Catholic Housing Services. The other thing financially is that the State Housing Trust Fund had no money last year. And the projects that they had the year before were very targeted to specific populations. And so we need to have a healthy housing trust fund because our contribution to the funding is about 25%. That's our cap. And they need to have other funding in order to make those things go. We had a couple of projects that were close to happening, but they didn't have site control. They didn't have ownership of the land either. And so several of the housing developers are out trying to find land to acquire so that they can come and with a project that's closer to ready to go. So I anticipate that we'll have projects next year, but I think it'll take time. The levy is new as well, and so people are just trying to. They weren't expecting these funds to be available, and they weren't really quite ready. But I'm quite sure that by the end of the levy, we will have all those dollars committed.
Mr. Stahlheim, you've mentioned some of the usual players in the housing, the affordable housing sector. Do you think we can attract a player who isn't here now, someone who maybe does housing affordability projects elsewhere in the state who might see this opportunity? We have the same view, like, the housing authority. Is there ways that we can attract other people who would take advantage of this and be a qualified provider?
Yeah, I think so. And there's a couple that have limited projects in the community that are interested in doing other things. Mercy Housing is one that doesn't have a huge portfolio in this community, but they are definitely interested in doing another project here. So I would see them being an applicant. There's another group out of Seattle that is working on a project that was really close to doing something as well. So I do see that.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Councilwoman Vargas.
I don't feel like this is an either or, and I think if we can help some people immediately, I would like to do that, and I am supportive of this plan.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion.
Okay. Roxanne.
Well, I'm just wanting to express optimism that, this fund is a great way that we can show our support, but we as a council can also come together to set other incentives and ways to attract affordable, transitional, and other kinds of housing. I mean, there are tax abatement things to look at. There are set-asides for such housing in different projects, so I hope we can look at those things in the future.
Okay. We have a motion. Michael, do you have a motion or not? Or you want to we'll move it forward tonight and talk about it then? It's up to you.
I'm a little bit undecided, so if you ask for a vote, I don't know what I'd say right now.
Okay, we'll move it forward tonight.
Thank you.
With a mixed recommendation. Okay, next we need a motion on resolution authorizing the 2014 HUD Action Plan.
I so move.
Okay. Michael.
This is different from the previous item, but does this action plan assume the levy is amended?
It does for, $75,000 of that.
Okay, well, I'm still undecided.
Okay,
I'll decide by tonight.
We'll move that forward for tonight. End of committee. Oh, excuse me. Well, I didn't go fast enough, did I? Go ahead, Jack. I got to.
So, David, I was noticing on the action plan summary, I had a couple questions. One, under the preservation program components, are any of those loans, or are they literally they just grants for the preservation program?
Everything that we do that affects real estate is considered a loan. So when we renovate property, whether it's the YWCA or domestic violence sexual assault services property, we provide that as a loan. As long as they continue to provide a benefit, some of them we don't get paid, and we may never get paid as long as they continue to provide that community benefit. But we put a deed of trust, lien on the property, promissory note to get repaid on those. The one exception that we have is the manufactured housing program. And it's something that we're in conversations with the Opportunity Council because they don't own the dirt quite often. They're just leasing their pad site. And there's concern that if we actually liened the home, that if they walked away, we would become the owners of the homes. And so that's an exception that we have. So we still provide it as a loan, but we don't lien it like we do with something that owns the dirt.
Okay. And then can you speak briefly to just the these are 3 projects that I haven't heard of before, but I'm just wondering if you could help me out with that. The Cornwall House, this is under the production program. The Cornwall Housing, the Greggy's House, and Bakerview Family Housing.
Okay, Cornwall Housing, you probably are familiar with, it's down in Cornwall.
Oh,
That's a
okay,
Catholic
that's-
Housing Services project.
I didn't know the title
downtown.
of it. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a project that's about ready to break ground. Greggy's House is the name that they assigned to a project that we gave funds to last year, that's Sun Community Services. It's a duplex off of Lincoln Street. They're renovating it right now. We kind of operate as a group home, working with homeless and people with mental and other disabilities there. And then the Bakerview Family Housing is a Catholic Housing Services project out on Bakerview. That's the farm worker housing project. So 50 units of farm worker housing. And we acquired the land, or they acquired the land. We helped purchase that land here in the last year, and now they're getting all their development financing in place to start construction of that.
Great, thank you.
So what's the total of all the units? Is it over 90 some?
Yeah, I think we're at about 98 units on the production side, and our goal was 101 units.
101.
So,
It's all in the pen. It's all in the pen. Kathy?
Real quickly, David, could you clarify, there were 2 proposed Catholic Housing Services projects at Cornwall, and this is one of them, is that correct?
yeah, one was at Cornwall and one was on Bakerview. That's the Bakerview Family Housing. That's the farm worker housing project.
Well, I just mean, at Cornwall, people may know about this concept, and there were actually 2 possible projects, and this is one of them that will continue to occur.
Yeah, I mean, we only had one project, the 42-unit project. Yeah,
Okay.
they had additional land that they're in the process of selling that land.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
Yep.
Greg, thank you for your input.
And the committee?